Okay, so if you're a parent, your mental to-do list probably looks something like this. Supper in the slow cooker. Leave work 15 minutes early to get the youngest to the doctor. Don't forget it's red day at school on Friday. And how much is dance registration again? There are many things that can make parenting stressful. You might be more likely to live away from your support network these days too. Grandparents could live across the province, the country, or the world. You could be a single parent, a parent of a child with a disability. It is fair to say that no matter what your circumstances are, parenting comes with a lot of stress. But is modern parenting really that much harder now than in previous generations? The U.S. Surgeon General says parents are so stressed right now, he issued a public health advisory. So today on the show, we'll ask parents what they think.
Oh, many things keep me up at night. Making sure they're healthy and happy and fed and they got a roof over their heads.
So many things, and we want to hear from you. Are you raising kids right now? Why does it feel so hard sometimes? Or if yours have left the nest, what was it like for you? And what are you observing as people like me currently raise little ones? 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. So what exactly is stressing parents out these days? Here are some Saskatoon parents that I've chatted with over the years.
I think it's probably just in general, emotional regulation, I think is like the biggest thing, is like growing up in the 80s and 90s, emotions weren't a part of the conversation in the same way that they are now. And I think it's because so many of us grew up without that conversation and then now have gone to like therapy and all this other stuff and have worked on our own mental health and emotional health. I feel like there's always kind of these two voices in my head. One's like, just tell them to suck it up. And like the other one's like, no, you have to like acknowledge their, like how do you balance like acknowledging a child's feelings and supporting them through whatever they're going through, but also like moving on with your day as well.
Yeah, many things keep me up at night.
It's not an easy world to navigate sometimes, is it?
Sometimes it's not, and I hate to say it, but, they're Indigenous kids, right? And they go through their challenges living in the city as Indigenous youth, and they tell me the stuff they go through. So I talk with them, I visit with them, and try to help them understand the challenges they're facing and what they can do about it.
Making sure they're doing homework, showing up for school. My son has a lot of anxiety and he's trying to get his driver's license. So just kind of guiding them through the daily how-tos of becoming an adult. I was thinking combined between my kids, I have 26 years experience of parenting. I have no idea what I'm doing. It changes. I thought that it would get easier as they got older. In some ways, it's gotten harder. I've learned that, I can't expect something from them that I wouldn't expect from myself. So I've had to do a lot more, personal self-work than I expected so that I could be there for them in that way. But questions would be how to continue to guide someone into adulthood, that letting go process. And, some days I feel like I'm too much in his business. Other days I feel like I've stepped way too far back and I don't know how to gradually let go. And then, right now with a preteen in kind of middle school, it's bullying, makeup, body image, all of that. And I don't know what I'm doing.
Nobody does.
I'm finally sleeping. We didn't sleep well for so many years, so I'm sleeping well, actually. That's a nice thing. But little things that are on my mind. So I'm a little worried about, or thinking about, as their innocence goes away a little bit, as they learn more about the world, about climate change, about global conflict, inequality. It's kind of heartbreaking to see their little innocent selves learn about the world. And the one thing I've been thinking is I kind of put all my energy into the first one, so I'm like, do I have anything left in the gas tank for the second kid?
Oh, those poor second kids. Those are some of the Saskatoon parents I've spoken with over the years. Now, our guests today are all parents, but they all come at today's conversation with a different perspective. Sage Yathan is a mother of 2. She also works closely with the young mothers at Belfer Collegiate and was the founder of the Mamas for Mamas Facebook group in Regina. She's in our Regina studio. Sage, hello. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Hello.
And then also in our Regina studio is Cecilia Rands. She's a mother of 2, currently works for the YMCA, and is a former postpartum doula. Cecilia, hello.
Hi, thanks. I work for the YWCA, actually. Sorry.
Yes, that makes sense. YWCA. And then Peter Brass is a Regina dad of 2. He's moved beyond the young kid phase and will share some of his hard-earned wisdom with us today. So, Peter, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. And last but not least, in our Saskatoon studio is Albert Jamie. Albert is a Saskatoon dad with his second child on the way. Make sure you save energy for that second child, Albert.
Of course. Glad to be back.
Yeah, good to have you here. Thank you. So what sparked this whole conversation? We're going to cover a lot of ground, but I want to start with the spark, right? So the Surgeon General warning, saying parents are more stressed out than other adults. And he's so worried about it that he's actually issued an advisory about the mental health and well-being of parents. So I want to get each of your take on that. Cecilia, maybe I'll start with you. What did you think when you read that?
Yeah, sure. Honestly, I laughed in that maniacal way that you laugh when something is not that surprising, but still feels unreal. I was a little bit surprised that the Surgeon General felt the need to put out such a public health advisory, but also not surprised by the content that I was reading about the levels of stress and the way that they, the statistics showing that, twice as many parents as non-parents are experiencing more stress than they can, reasonably manage. Not surprised. Disappointed, but not surprised.
Peter, what's your take?
I'm in agreement that parenting is stressful, but I think that they're running out of things to put warnings out for. So it may not be as kind of doom and gloom as the warning is wanting to necessitate. But yeah.
It's given me a lot to think about too, because on one hand I feel constantly stressed. How could you not be stressed when we love these little beings so much? But also we're getting by. But everybody's story is so different. So Sage, what's your take?
Honestly, when I first saw it, I felt a little annoyed. I was skimming through and came across the point. I actually ended up having to skip the entire section where they decided to remind us how it was impacting our children, how stressed we are. I thought, I can't read anything else that has to remind me that it's ironic because, he's trying to address the mental health concerns of parents, but he's saying that our mental health issues are also impacting our children, but that stresses us out. It's like this ongoing cycle. And I don't think that we need to be constantly reminded that that we have to address everything that we have going on for ourselves in order to show up and be this perfect product of a parent to be a perfect parent for our children. I think, we have value just as a human being, and we don't necessarily need to be, at mass, ultimate parent so that just for another person. It should just stop at the point where it's like, we just deserve to feel restful and happy and well.
Yeah, and like we're doing enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Albert, what's your take?
My take's like theirs. I was surprised that they were going to be hitting the Surgeon General so hard as I was, because my big question is, who is this guy and why does it matter that it was guns, they said, and tobacco, that the warnings were out? So I'm assuming it's like, don't.
Social media has come up too.
Oh, it says reduce and don't use. They're warnings, right? They're not changing policy. I don't know. I think they're just warnings. Don't play with firearms. Don't smoke. And so is this a warning to say, don't have kids?
I don't know.
Is that essentially what it's for? Thanks, Captain Obvious. I mean, if you're, just go to the park. Just go to the grocery store. Yeah. It's like, was that their study? It's just like, these people look like they're death pushing the grocery cart. It's tough. Parenting is tough. There's no debate there. I don't think that's the case. It's been tough ever since the dawn I met person. But is it actually harder? That's the bigger question. Is it actually gotten harder? And I was going to say no, but then your whole intro to this whole thing kind of made me rethink about it. It's like the whole hockey practice and time and worrying about their social media. There is actually probably more to contend with now, that it might be harder. And I was just this morning, I was going to be like, no, it wasn't harder. So just within like 5 minutes, I just changed my mind. Thanks.
So interesting. Cecilia, I'm wondering if you can pick up on that. What are the things unique to right now that are making parenting stressful?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Albert, but I totally disagree. Like, I came in, yes, it's definitely harder, and I still believe that it's harder. I will, defend that. I think it's harder because I think it's a double-edged sword, this modern world we live in. We have so much more information. We have so much more access to, studies about childhood brain development and mental health. Somebody in those audio recordings at the beginning of the show talking about, our parents weren't necessarily validating our emotions and helping us with that, with those regulation skills. I know a lot of people in my generation and my age range becoming parents who are only discovering their own neurodivergencies as their children receive diagnoses or support for things like ADHD and autism, that particularly women were really systemically underdiagnosed and undersupported in the 80s and 90s when we were in school. So I think that it's not that the material circumstances have necessarily changed, although obviously that is another thing we could talk about with inflation and the economy and the pandemic and everything that our parents didn't have to worry about in the same ways. But I also think that it's just that double-edged knife of we know so much more and we still just have to make the choices to do what is best for us and our families with the information that we have. But in the 80s and 90s, nobody was worried about, microwaving plastic or, what was in your the bread you packed your kids' lunches with, right? And now we are just inundated all day, every day. And it sort of reminds me, ignorance is bliss. Like, it was easier when we just didn't know as much.
Sage, what do you think? And you have such an interesting window into parenting because of who you work with. So what do you think is making parenting so stressful right now for some?
I found it interesting. He mentioned in his report, he brought up all of the very important statistics of, people who are experiencing poverty and like complex family situations where the numbers are higher for them. But he sort of just swept that to the side when it came down to when he was really discussing like the solutions. I scrolled quickly to the bottom, like, well, what is he proposing? What does he think is going to fix this? Or what does he think people need? And it's just mental health support. And it's, you can't fix systemic issues with therapy. Someone can't therapy themselves out of homelessness. They can't the solutions that he was proposing are pretty frustrating. And I feel like what I see is people, in survival mode, just trying to keep their head above water. And every week there's something else knocking them down. And it's a fight and it's a full-time job. Like experiencing poverty, you don't get ahead. There's so many systems working against you, making it impossible to get ahead. And it relates to parenting. We don't always see those as parenting issues, but when these are families with children, when you don't have affordable daycare, affordable housing, accessible food, how do you parent? It's causing a lot of issues. So.
Yeah. It made me think about differences between the United States and Canada. And so something like parental leave, we have access to that in Canada. It's much shorter. I think 6 weeks most people are back at work, universal health care. There are some differences between Canada and the U.S. And you're absolutely right, Sage, that not everybody has access in Canada to affordable daycare. So, there are so many similarities and there are also some differences. Peter, as you listen to all of this, wondering what your thoughts are and what you think may or may not be making parenting stressful right now.
I want to say I agree wholeheartedly with the first person that was speaking on just the kind of street interviews that you opened with. And, of course, much what Cecilia and Sage have just said. I think it really does come down to who you're talking to, who you're asking. All of the issues of poverty and substance abuse and, stuff as Cecilia mentioned with the economy and all of the, social media. I come at it from a perspective, an Indigenous perspective, and more specifically, my own Indigenous perspective. I don't want my experience to paint a broad brush view of anyone else, but I think a lot of the parenting stress that I've faced was due to knowing what I needed to do to change patterns in parenting style that had been kind of cyclical in our communities and families. And so there was that stress of knowing better, having to, do better. And so that's where a lot of my stress came from, is, constantly questioning whether I was doing it right by not repeating certain things. And a lot of the self-work. So it's hard to come home from, say, an intense counseling session and having to turn what I spoke about in that session into an immediate practice. Facing kind of menial parenting chores and reprimanding and stuff like that, and trying to change immediately. So I think that's where a lot of my parenting stress came from.
Mm-hmm. That's big, Peter. Thanks for sharing. It makes me think about how we have access to many supports, but whether or not some, I think we could question how valuable some of them are. I'm thinking specifically about social media and the number of parenting handbooks. And so you might be reevaluating, okay, how am I doing this? You just turn on your phone, go on Instagram, and the mom down the street might be a mommy blogger or an influencer and is talking about whatever she's doing, and that has an effect on us and how we make choices and how we feel about our parenting. Albert, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on some of that, just how much information we have at our fingertips and how that's influencing the choices we make and how we feel about some of those choices.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that it's a support or a tool that's social media. I kind of look at that as a detractor, or like something that's adding to the problem. Personally, I come from that world, but I think that it's created an immense amount of pressure on parents to have to be at that status and at that level of what other parents are doing. And if you don't, there's this sort of FOMO of not doing it right. And I think that has caused probably some overparenting. And again, these are just my takes. Again, I could get canceled for everything I'm thinking about here. But it's true that it could just be causing a slight bit of overparenting. And I'm not, I'm totally ignoring the people who are worrying about true issues, like feeding their children and getting them to school on time. And real stresses and people who have children with high needs, that's not them. I'm a lot of the people in my circle, I feel sometimes overparent their kids because they're seeing so much. And again, as you said, Cecilia, they know it and you have to do something about it. But there's a point where that is going to cause negative, and again, the overparenting is probably not for the benefit of the kid. It's just to calm your own anxiety as a parent. Mm-hmm. And so I think that at a certain point, you just have to kind of ignore that. But where that line is, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm Leisha Gravinsky. You are listening to Blue Sky. Today, we're talking about stress and the stress that parents feel. And the big question that I think really comes after the U.S. Surgeon General's warning about parental stress is who had it harder, and is it really harder now? And it forced me to, read a couple of stories that take a look back at what it was like, not too long ago, and you kind of realize how recent parental leave is, and just what people older than us faced. And perhaps you're listening and you're like, hey, this is what it was like when I was parenting, and this is what I'm observing now. So give us a shout, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. And I want to put that question to all of our guests today. Cecilia, what do you think? Harder now or harder way back then?
I mean, I guess we can look at a million different categories or metrics for what was harder. I definitely don't wish I was a woman or mother or parent in the 70s or 80s necessarily. And I think what's harder now is, like we've mentioned about so many things, we have more awareness of the issues. We have more awareness of children's mental health, and things like social media are still a really big unknown. We're essentially, this generation are the guinea pigs for things like social media in a similar way that I think my generation was a guinea pig for internet in a wider and and just computers and more technology in a wider way. But I also think I want to go back to something Sage said about, that we forget that poverty is a parenting issue too. And I actually just want to point out the thing about parental leave. While it's true that we do have this, protected right of parental leave in Canada, that doesn't mean that people are being compensated, right? I had 2 maternity leaves with my 2 children, and for one of them, I didn't receive any pay because of the type of work that I was doing at the time, and for the other one, I received 55%. So obviously, there are lots of employers that are topping up those EI benefits, and obviously, it is still a vast improvement over the States. But for a lot of people, a 45% pay cut over the course of a year, when your life doesn't get cheaper when you have a baby, you don't suddenly need less money. And yeah, when I think about, my stress as a single parent, as a working mother, as just living in this world, parenting my kids through a pandemic, through, a climate crisis, through, children, mental health crises, and watching their friends suffer through things that they haven't had to deal with. These issues are not just about parenting. They're not just about kids. These are the same worldwide issues that we're seeing play out in elections and debates and across newsrooms everywhere, I think.
Peter, what do you think? When you compare parenting from previous generations, what do you think?
I too would not want to be a parent of the older generation. Historically, things such as residential schools that really severed our family ties and our family values in parenting skills. I think the older generations that I went through that, obviously they did the best they could when it came time to raise their children, but, insecurity and shame and, anger and all of those things that were internalized by them took a toll. And I think that was stress, for as much as, the older generation was hands off, I think that hands-off style was stressful on them because they felt they didn't have control of their family home, and so with the amount of information that we have today, although the work is hard, I think I do have it easier than, say, my parents or grandparents did.
Yeah. Sage, what do you think?
When I think about just like the difference that I notice the most is we've sort of been talking about it a bit already, but just like the age of information and just knowing, it almost seems like we're given. It's like someone is saying you're given all the tools, you could do this perfectly if you would just try harder. And I feel like it really zaps our confidence. And I can't speak for like the parents of the past and if they felt confident in their parenting, but at the end of the day, it's just you head on with your child trying to work through whatever little tiny conflict that feels gigantic in the moment and not having any confidence. Personally, I feel like anytime I'm stuck when I don't know what to do, it's like I have 15 options rolling around in my head that it's like, you could do it this way, you could do it this way. There is a perfect option, but you don't know what it is. And I sort of just wish I could be on autopilot and just have a bit more confidence. And I don't know if that's a big difference between generations, but that does definitely feel like that's something I notice for parents now.
And some of those options, like they have titles, right? There's like different parenting styles that people, talk about. Albert, so one thing I want to ask you, I think that I'll speak for myself. When you become a parent, you often reflect on how your parents parented you, and I think there's a lot of nostalgia that comes up about the 80s and 90s and running free and just some of that. I'm wondering, and there were benefits to that. Whether it was truly like that, I'm not sure if it was easy and carefree the way we sometimes characterize it now. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I can only give the sort of middle class view again. And I grew up in Swift Current in a small town where my parents were very active in my life, but I feel like neglect was more accepted then. They could just send you away for 8 hours and you come back and they don't even ask where you were and you're just like, I don't even know what I was doing, but it's something I'm not going to tell you. But it's funny, they could actually, just lives weren't as sweet and entertaining for parents back then. We have so much at our disposal that we have so many man children that are my age. Yeah. But my dad had to grow up really quick and he seemed like a parent, and very mature. But I feel like there's a maturity back then that they kind of just were more comfortable with it. And this is, again, like my 8-year-old view.
Yeah.
But if there's one thing I was going to say is that one thing that we could probably chill out on, if you think about what it was like in the 80s and 90s, is water. Like water. Like for some reason, we just
Everybody needs a water bottle.
Everybody needs a water bottle. Everybody needs a fashionable one.
And then we lose them, and
Yeah, and you would just go, oh my God, Keegan hasn't had a drink in like 20 minutes. Like when we grew up,
I didn't drink
you
water.
literally had that ceramic water fountain that you lined up, and then you would go and take your turn, and then you'd try to drink as much as you could, and then a kid get behind you goes, hey, save the whales, man. And then you just walk away, and you're just like, well, that's the only water I get today. And guess what? We're fine, you know?
This is a perfect segue to our next guest, because I think she's thinking about these things that you're bringing up, Albert, and all the thoughtful things that have come up today. So the question is it harder to parent now? Ashley Miller is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry at UBC, and she joins us right now. Ashley, you've been listening. Welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm just really enjoying the conversation, both the funny parts and also just how thoughtful and meaningful it's been so far. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So what do you want to bring to this conversation? Because you have heard everything that's come up so far, and I want to ask you: is it harder? But what do you like? What do you think?
Well, I don't think anyone can really say for sure if it's objectively harder or not. There's no doubt that in a practical way, lots of people in the past have had it much harder than most of us have it now. But it's not a generalization. People who are struggling with some income insecurity, with food insecurity, I mean, it could be very well way harder right now than it ever was. There's sort of different groups.
How did you respond when the U.S. Surgeon General came out with this advisory? What did you think of that?
Well, I think all the wisdom's come up so far from your callers. I felt very much the same, like in one sense, this is what I've been seeing for years. So it's pretty obvious. And in another sense, kind of happy that it's front and center as the conversation, because a lot of parents are alone in feeling like this and feel kind of ashamed and isolated. So just to know they're really not alone. This is a huge public health issue. And then the other point that was raised, that for some parents, reading that your stress is actually problematic just sort of feeds into that cycle of feeling badly about your own stress.
Yeah, that actually does lead to my next question. Like, is this advisory helpful? Like, what does it actually tell us?
Well, I think it's helpful to shine a light on the fact that it is a problem, because I'd agree with that. But what I found most helpful in the advisory is the practical tips at the end, or the recommendations. And what I really liked about it is that the recommendations were by and large for other people, not for parents and caregivers, like for policymakers, for healthcare professionals, for schools, for employers, because that's really, I mean, I've always thought the parenting book should be written for everyone else. Like, what can you do to support parents? Because it's such a hard job.
Yeah.
Here.
I don't know who said here. Was that Cecilia?
Yeah, that was me. Sorry.
No, it's good to hear your voice. And I think you're not the only one saying here. Maybe talk about that a little bit, Ashley. What do we have now that we didn't have before? I think we sometimes forget what is available to parents now that wasn't before.
Well, in terms of supports or stresses?
Well, supports actually is what I was going to ask you about. Like thinking about parental leave and the safety net that we may have in Canada and not the U.S. But just what do you think we do have?
I think what we do have, it depends on where you live, although there are more virtual resources, like mental health resources for parents provided through the federal government in Canada. But we do have some parent support groups. We do have various provincial governments run. It doesn't have to be a mental health focus, like just mom and baby story time, Mother Goose, Nobody's Perfect Parenting. Just ways to get parents together in a social way with their kids. We do have parent networks for parents of kids with mental health issues or kids with neurodevelopmental issues. So lots of different parent support around various health concerns. And here, of course, having more extended parental leave is helpful, but like your caller said, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the financial resources to go along with the time off.
In one of the stories that I read on some of the coverage of the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory, it was pointed out that we haven't really tracked what parenting has been like over the years. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, that every generation thinks it was hardest for them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember my mother saying how she had a C-section and 2 days later was making dinner with one hand while vacuuming with the other. And every generation has its own struggles, but we do need better research, and that was one of the Surgeon General's recommendations, is to really track parenting stress so that we have the data that we can look over time and more specifically identify the factors that may be leading into it, the ones that we all feel are likely to be the case.
Every generation kind of feels that way, but even I find amongst parents that, especially when you might have a newborn baby, and then another parent will come at you and say, "You just wait. They're sleeping now. They won't sleep later." Or, a parent of teenagers will say, "Just wait. It gets harder." What are your thoughts on that? That kind of cycle of, frankly, negativity when it comes to parenting. That we kind of there's this openness, and that's a really great thing. But also, is there a risk in kind of talking about how hard it is? Does that just kind of feed into itself?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stress in parenting comes from worry about the future. And if we have confidence, like one of your callers said, I completely agree with that. Having confidence, just knowing that it doesn't have to be a perfect way, there isn't one perfect way, that the way we're choosing to do it right now is actually probably the most important thing, that helps a lot. So when other people, as well-meaning as they are, tell us, oh, it's going to be hard, or question our way of doing things, I think that does definitely lead to stress. And so that's why, if I see a parent in the grocery store with their child who's struggling, I'm not going to come over and give a unhelpful suggestion about what they could do better. To the contrary, I want to go over and maybe sympathize or commiserate or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. We want to build parents' confidence up and not suggest that there's all these different ways they could or should do something.
Ashley, so good to have you today. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
Ashley Miller is Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry at UBC. Now, in studio with me, we've got Albert Jamie, who's a dad, second child on its way, and then we have 3 guests in Regina: Sage Yathan, Cecilia Rands, and Peter Brass. Now, Peter, your kids are older. They're older than mine, so don't tell me it's going to get harder. You can if you want, but curious about that, because you've got a bit of wisdom for people listening who are really in the trenches of those first, 0 to 5 is kind of a hard stage. So what have you learned over the years about the cycles of parenting and how things shift as the kids get older?
So my daughter's 21 and my son is turning 19 next month. It gets different, if I could put it that way. It doesn't get, necessarily easier. It gets a little bit harder emotionally, because there's a distance, whether it be geographical or just, life. They're living their own lives, and, I or their mom, Jory, is not necessarily the authority in their life anymore. It's easy to say, looking back now, that little baby that's keeping you up at night, you don't have enough time with them. So there's that kind of like a sadness to being an older parent. But it just gets different. It doesn't get any easier, I don't think. It gets more different.
So true. Yeah. Cecilia, what are your thoughts on that? As the kids change, how do we change as parents?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Peter said, and I think I've been saying that since I had babies, that every stage is easier in some ways and harder in other ways, right? Mm-hmm. They start sleeping through the night, but now they're throwing tantrums or throwing their food across the table or whatever. And my kids are 12 and 7, so I'm sort of in 2 different stages of parenting, because there's such an age gap between them. But I think the way I always thought about it, and what I think is still serving me well, is that it's all about laying the foundation. And I think what I tell myself, too, because I don't always feel great about the foundation that I laid in the earlier years or even just last year, and there are things that I might want to change. And I think the best thing that I've done for my parenting and for my relationship with my kids is to let myself change my mind, is to talk to them about, the rules. We got, back to school has started, so now in my house I have to, get stricter about bedtime and stuff. And again, that 5-year age gap, you tell my 7-year-old that the 12-year-old can stay up an extra half hour and she is not impressed. Like, there is no justice in her world. But I think, having that flexibility and admitting to my kids, hey, I think I kind of screwed this up. Can we try this again? Or I want to talk about what would work best for our family, for bedtime routines, or for, homework, or, what you're expected to do when you walk home alone after school and I'm still at work. So I think like those foundations are what help carry me, because the way that I've always thought about parenting, I remember when my first daughter was very young, and people always say parenting is the hardest job in the world. And I had a close friend who said, it's not a job, it's a relationship. And I think that really helped sort of reframe the way I approached my kids and the way I approached parenting. And it's still something that I think about all the time, because if at the core of my parenting values and strategies is the fact that my kids are whole, autonomous humans who deserve, respect and care and love, just like every other human on planet Earth, is like, it has to start with that relationship. And that doesn't mean that there isn't, obviously a power imbalance, because, I have to, drive you to school and take you to the doctor and make sure you go to bed at a certain time, whatever. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that it has to be authoritarian, right? That doesn't mean that I have to be the dictator of my household. And it also doesn't mean that anybody else has to be parenting the same way as me, right? And I think that was the thing that felt the most empowering for me when I sort of realized that like my relationship with my kids is not the same as Peter's relationship with his kids, or Sage's relationship with her kids, or the relationships that my kids have with their dad or with their grandparents or whomever. And that's okay. Like, we don't expect everyone's relationships or friendships to look identical. So why do we expect parenting to be, why do we expect to be exactly the same as other parents?
So interesting. Sage, curious about your thoughts on this, how your parenting has shifted, and then especially because you're mentoring you're with other parents, with other moms. So what wisdom have you gained that you now share?
I feel like the thing I hear the most is just questioning, like, am I a good mom? Am I a bad mom? And, I don't believe that there's such a thing as bad moms. I think, like, I tell them, bad moms don't worry about being bad moms. Like, if you're trying to do your best, then that makes you a good mom. And like I said before, like, the confidence thing for me, like, that has made a big difference. And just realizing, like, this, I am the only person that, like, it's just between us. It's not, I don't have to listen to outside voices. I don't have to listen to new research. And, like, at the end of the day, I'm going to have to do it the path of least resistance sometimes is okay, and not, like, trying to optimize your parenting. And, I have a lot of girls who are worried about repeating some of these cycles or not wanting to make the same mistakes that their parents made. And so it's also can be refreshing to hear, like, you don't have to break every cycle. If you break one cycle, if you do one thing a little bit better than the person before you, then, like, huge difference going forward.
That's lovely. Albert, what do you think? Your oldest is what, 3?
3.5,
and
almost 4, yeah.
And a second one on the way. So what wisdom have you gained in that period of time?
Well, yeah, I'm just listening to their wisdom, and they're making me feel like I'm doing it all wrong almost. But thankfully, I have a really amazing wife and mom at home who's up on the latest parenting techniques. So I'm a really kind of laid back dad. I'm involved as much as I possibly can. Obviously, I have a pretty flexible job, but also demanding at certain times. Mm-hmm. So, but it's an interesting thing just watching the evolution of you learn so much about yourself as a parent. Just understanding and seeing your child embody what you do. And so, I haven't admittedly read a lot about parenting, but I just follow the lead with my wife, who makes a lot of the decisions. So she probably burdens a lot more in the anxiety. But it comes my anxiety at a certain point, because I'm always worried about what she's going to be thinking about as well, because I'm pretty more, not hands off. I'm just more like, I just want to see how they kind of navigate that situation. And if I'm a little bit more okay about them failing and maybe scraping their knee a little bit more. And that every parent, you're never going to have that equal balance in that. My big question is, what is it going to be in 25 years from now? Are we going to have the same program and talk about the exact same thing? Do you think we were going to cure it?
That is the $1 million question.
I don't know. I doubt it. It's probably we could have had this program 25 years ago, 100 years ago. It's probably the same discussion. Yeah. And we're always going to have more tools at our disposal. but I don't think people are going to be that much more okay. There's not like, could you imagine 2050? All of a sudden, it's like parenting's super easy.
Yeah, it's
Like,
never easy.
No,
Can't
it's
optimize
never.
it. It's not about optimizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think parenting is hard because it's important, right? Like I
Yeah.
think like Sage said, if you're worried about it, that's a good sign. That means you care.
Yeah.
And I think it like maybe we won't always see these levels of stress because I also just think that that's just a reflection of the world that we live in right now. But I bet in 25 years there will still be programs like this because I think parents in every generation need support. And chances are in every generation they have needed more support than they got. And that is still true. And that will probably continue to be true. So like you can call me back every 5 years and I'll keep doing this because
Deal. Yeah. Okay, I want to share with you just a couple of other voices. So Elaine is another mom in Saskatoon. She read the article, and here's how she reacted.
I can totally relate. It's like stressful in such a way that definitely there's the comparing side. That like no matter what, I tell myself that I would disconnect. I would focus on how I'm gonna like raise my kid. It's hard because like the environment is really like one big factor for everybody, not just for me as the parent, but also for the kid. I'm lucky that I have lots of support system. Both of the grandparents are still around, and our roots is from the Philippines. So in the Philippines, if I just gave birth, they would come over for like let's say 2 weeks or more than 2 weeks to help for me and for the newborn to adjust, and then until we all like settled. But like here, I'm thankful that I have that immediate family here, but like majority of the other Filipino community, they don't have that big support system. That we are all used to it. So that's one thing. And then another is actually just like an hour ago, my coworkers were asking like, hey, like, when are you having your second child and everything? So I always just answer like inflation, guys, inflation. Like that's the shortest answer I could give them. It's like it's inflation because like the food, the clothing, like how can you afford to have another kid? 6 items in the grocery nowadays is like $160 just for 6 items. Like how? Oh, and then another point is a lot of like wait lists for daycare. With us, we did not have any daycare at all. So it's just me and my husband relieving each other. Like I'll be at work, he'll be with the kid, and then vice versa. He'll be working, I'll be with the kid. Other than it's a cost, another expense for us to pay for daycare. There's also there's no availabilities in daycares nowadays.
So just that short bit from Elaine and like brought up a whole bunch of other things. And yeah, the fact that she can't get a spot at a daycare, but it also saves money. And then that question that can sometimes feel so sometimes invasive, when are you having a second kid? And her answer is just inflation. She had a good chuckle about that. We got an email from Donna who writes, maybe the stress levels of parents would diminish if there was a guaranteed income in Canada. People, not just parents, are spinning their wheels and sinking deeper into the mud. A guaranteed income would allow people to take a breath and logically determine what is best for their family. Not everyone can afford a nanny and private school. That comes to us from Donna. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time left, but I want to give us each kind of like 30 seconds to just share some final reflections. We're all going to go home and keep parenting. So what would you say is your takeaway from the show today? Cecilia, you're smiling. I'll start with you.
Oh, I'm always smiling. That's a terrible cue. Okay. You know, I've got to be honest that one of the things I came in thinking about today was, and I'm not pointing any fingers or trying to be divisive at all, but the way that mothering and fathering are often portrayed differently and talked about differently in our media conversations. And I think that it matters that the Surgeon General report came out of the States at a time when reproductive freedoms and women's rights are like a pressing issue in the States. We have candidates that are, opposed to no-fault divorce. We have candidates that, we've seen Roe v. Wade taken back. And these are parenting issues because if people are not free to choose when and how they become parents and with whom, they are starting out in a stressful place. So I think that's my closing thought, is that this is also an issue of women's health and justice, reproductive rights and justice.
Peter, what nugget are you going to take home with you tonight, do you think, as you continue to parent even older kids, adults?
That's right. I'm going to, try to be less focused on the stress, because the stress is, as we've kind of said, is generational. Every generation is going to have stress, and focus on what's important in terms of why are we stressed. It's because we have these little kids, we have these adults, we have children, and I'm just going to hug them as much as I can. I'm going to smell them. I'm going to pinch their ears. I'm going to, I'm just going to, because we are our heroes in our children's eyes, and I want to be curious about their inner worlds, and I want to humanize myself to them. I want the stress to be worth it.
Yeah, it is. Love that, Peter. Thank you. Sage, what about you?
He's making me cry here.
I know.
I think it's okay if we're a little stressed. I think stress is what keeps us moving. I think there's two different kinds of stress. There's healthy stress and there's chronic stress. And I think chronic stress isn't going to go anywhere without some serious change in the system. So,
thank you, Sage. Thanks for that. Albert, what nugget are you taking home with you?
Well, first of all, I'm just saying that every time I come on the show, I'm like, you get like real academics or people who are real experts, and then you get me who feels like he just got separated from his tour group. And I just landed in the studio. But, I do have another one on the way. And the one thing I was always trying to remind myself is that, you have to enjoy all the pain that comes with it. And again, my middle class view where everything is kind of less stressful, but it's more about just the anxiety of raising a child in this sort of world. But just the idea that, the sleepless nights are tough.
They're so tough, but we love them. We love them so much.
And my one friend, and I'll leave you this, said, why do I hate being a father hate parenting but love being a father?
It's so true. Thanks to everyone. This was a wonderful conversation. Just love my kids so much. So I'm going to do what Peter did, and I'm going to go squeeze their cheeks and smell their hair. Thanks so much, you guys. Have a great day. We're back tomorrow.